So, in this lecture, we want to work with control statements. And control statements basically help us to be able to control how our project or our program works. So there's certain things that we might need to control. Let's say, for example, we've got two options. We've got something that is true or false that can be controlled. We've got two numbers that we're comparing that also can be controlled. We've got something that we want to check whether our answer is negative or positive, or whether our answer is a whole number or a fractional number. So those are some of the things that we can actually work with in terms of controlling. And in general, why we work with control statements is we'd want to control the actions that will be taking place. So let's say, for example, we create a variable. We've got a variable that we call I, another one that we call j, like that. And we want to be able to control how certain things happen in a specific project. So I, we can initialize to 6, j we initialize to 10. Then we want to see how our control statement works. So the first control statement that we can work with is our if statement. And our if statement works as follows. We've got if, we've got normal brackets, we've got curly brackets, and we can then state what we want to state. So for example, we can say if I is less than j, we then want to print whatever that output might be, and we say I is definitely less than. My mistake, guys, sorry about that. I keep forgetting that I'm doing a lecture in C++. This is syntax for C, not C++. So let me actually just correct that. I'm sorry about that. We then want to display that I is less than j, like that. We put our end line and we put our semicolon, like that. So if we are to run this, if what is in line 11 is true, where we're saying if we open brackets I is less than j, we then want to display that content. So in other words, that's what we are then saying. We are controlling our statement to say as long as what is in the brackets is true, we want to be able to display what comes next. So that is the first part of our if statement. But if we are moving forward now and we want to have a second opinion to this, we can then create another statement that we call an else statement. And with our else statement, it pretty much gives us an alternative whereby it is the opposite of what this says. So if I copy that line and I paste it there, I can then say that I is not less than j, like that. So this then means the second option will not be printed, okay? But if we wanted to give us the alternative, I can simply duplicate that code and change some text, all right? And we say the following. I change the sign and say now that I is greater than j, which is not true. If I run it, it it's supposed to give me the opposite, where it then tells me the first one says I is definitely less than j. That is true. The second statement now says I is not less than j. So, which then means that the condition has changed, or the condition has shifted. Or rather, the statement I've got there is wrong. We're actually supposed to be saying j is actually greater than I. That's one way of putting it. Or we're actually saying I is not greater than j. That's also another statement that we can work with in terms of our if statement. So the first section, which is from line 11 to line 17, whereby we're saying if I is less than j, we then want to give an output whether I is less than j or I is not less than j. In the second statement, where we're saying if I is greater than j, then we're also supposed to get an output that gives us whether this is true or whether this is false. So that is how we actually work with our if statement. So our if statement can be used in that we check for the condition, and then if the condition matches what we want it to match, we can then be able to give the output that we are looking for, and our program will then run from that particular perspective or in that particular perspective. Okay, so let's also add something slightly different to our code. So we'll still be working with our if statement, and then we would want to add another form of control that we can work with our projects or with our programs. So let's create a new project outside of this one, and we will name it if statement with a control. Maybe that's how we can name it for the purposes of actually knowing what comes next. So we want to be able to control it, to then say at any given point in time, we might want to control how our program works. Okay, so let's say we've got some code that is already running, and we're then saying we've got a variable called num, and our num is equal to 10. Okay, we then want to control however our code is already running or whatever our code is doing. Okay, so we're then saying our num is equal to 10. Okay, so we can then put if num is not equal to 10, like that. We can then be able to print whatever we want to print. So we can then say cout, and our cout should then give us the content that we're looking for. If num is not equal to 10, we then want to say num not equal to 10, like that. But if it's equal to 10, we should be able to get something. So if we run it, it will not give us anything because num is equal to 10. Okay, but if we then say else, for our else statement now, we can put cout num is exactly 10. Okay, so when we know that num is exactly 10, we know that we have got our answer. Okay, but what happens if we want to stop a particular instance? Okay, let's stop a particular instance, right? We then want to maybe go a little bit forward a bit and introduce a concept. Okay, so we want to reinitialize num, and we say num is equal to 0. And then with this concept, we want to be able to see how we can actually manipulate our code. So we've got four, or rather, instead of saying manipulate, we actually say modify our code or control our code, because that's what we're actually doing with our control statements. Num is less than 11, and num iterates. So this is a new kind of statement, and this statement we actually call it a for statement, which we're actually putting in our if statement. Okay, but we're putting it for the sake of us showing how we can actually work with our if statement and our for statement. So we created a statement that we're saying for, in brackets, num equals to 0, num is less than 11, num iterates. Okay, and then now we want to be able to control how our program works. So to control our program, we then want to say the following. We want to be able to say cout, and cout is supposed to give us num is, okay, and then outside of num is, we then want to be able to get num, and then we want to be able to end line like that. Okay, so if we then run our project, okay, we had not built this. Let's build and see. Okay, still not giving us an answer. I know why it's not giving us an answer, because this, our content, is actually supposed to be here. Okay, no, I'm actually wrong. Our content is not supposed to be there. If our num is not equal to 0, let's try it that way. Yes, that then makes a lot of sense. We are simply saying our code did not run because we had said on line 8, if num, in brackets, num is not equal to 0, we were then supposed to, or rather was not equal to 10, we're then supposed to run what was in the brackets. But in this particular case, I just changed line 8 and I said if num is not equal to 0, then we want to be able to run whatever is running within our code. Okay, so in other words, that's how we then control our code, in that our if checks the first condition, our for gives us the next condition. So the next condition for our for was to actually start from 0 all the way until we get to 11, which then means we can be able to control our program using our if and our for statement. But at the same time, I have not still given you the control I wanted to actually work with. I wanted to then say, at this particular point, we can also further control our program by adding an extra value. So we can then say, if we open and we close brackets, num equals, we put a double equal sign, equals to 6, for example. We then want to be able to do the following. We then want to be able to break like that, so that the moment our loop is running or our statement is running, we can be able to stop it when num is equal to 6. So if I then run it, we then get the following. The first instance is that we are controlling our statement. The first statement we're controlling is if num is not equal to 0. That's the first statement that we're controlling. And then we get into the brackets of the if. Then we want to control the changes of our value num. So we put a for statement where we're saying for num is equal to 0, num is less than 11, num iterates. and then we want to display the contents of num, where we've got cout num is, and then we get our value for num. At the same time, we further want to control how that is working, and we say if num equals 6, then we want to break, so that we close our loop, or we close our statement. So that is how we can be able to control our statements, or we can be able to control how our program will be running. So this was just an example of how we can also control within a control using our statements. So the statement that we're working with here was our if, but we've also introduced a bit of the for, and we've also introduced a break. So at this particular instance, I can safely say we have seen how we can actually work with the if statement, and the process of actually having two if statements within each other is a process of nesting, although we have nested including a for statement. So in other words, we're then saying we can be able to create a project and nest certain attributes based on what we are hoping to achieve, or based on what we think would be right for us to use in our